Live. This is a relatively new experience for many of us here on Facebook, where we're bringing a lot of really interesting content for our ASA Facebook family and anyone else who's watching. We really are excited about our lineup today. Before we turn to it, I just want to remind folks we are in the midst of a membership drive that we're calling Membership Celebration. And we encourage you to visit our website to see that we have on offer opportunities to renew or sign up your membership at the ASA. And if you do, we'll add 2 free months on to your membership. And if you're an existing member, you're welcome to renew. And then the new membership at the new level will kick in when your current one expires. So please, we encourage you to sign up and become a member. We're also excited to share that for the next 2 weeks until Thanksgiving, we're offering students a 50% discount off of their membership over the next 2 weeks. We really want students to join, and not just to learn from the ASA and its rich, diverse membership, but to also engage us with your idea, your work, your research that you're doing. We'd love to hear from you. So let's talk a little bit about policy. Today, as we sort of welcome President-elect Biden to his new role beginning January 20th, when he'll become the 46th president, today we want to hold a different kind of policy discussion, one that really addresses what we in the aging community need to look for as he forms his immediate plans. In a nod to saying that all politics are local, in today's Facebook Live program, we look at our national goals with our policy committee chairs, Herr and Paul Downey, but also Jennifer Martin, who is chief of staff to Valerie Cartwright, the only Black councilwoman in the town of Brookhaven, New York. Brookhaven has about 500,000 residents, making it about the size of Atlanta, and really important voice to contribute to our policy conversation today. So I want to welcome all of you to ASA Live.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Thank you.
Now, as we get started, I want folks to feel comfortable asking any questions. This is just meant to be a casual conversation, so please add any questions or comments you have in the comment box. But let's get started. Amy, I want to ask you, President-elect Biden came out after the election swinging with one major priority, the first major priority, and that was responding to COVID. Can you sort of tell us what your take is on President-elect Biden's COVID plan? Does it include an equity approach regarding older adults of color? What are you seeing?
Thanks, Peter. The first thing I just want to acknowledge is that, 10 million people have been infected with COVID, and I think 140,000 people were diagnosed yesterday. So this is a huge problem, and we all know that people of color are just much disproportionately affected, and especially older adults of color. People are dying. Like, this is a huge problem that needs to be addressed right away, and probably 6 months ago. So one thing that I really like that Biden has proposed and is actually doing is, one of the first things he did after last weekend was set up a COVID task force, and he appointed the former U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy to lead the task force, and they're already working to get those plans organized. He's called for a national mask mandate and improve testing, tracing, and isolation for people that are affected by COVID, which is a growing number of Americans, and especially older Americans. And then specifically in nursing homes, which have been a hotbed for COVID infections, Biden has talked about ensuring that people have better PPE, the workers have better PPE, better testing availability, and improved oversight of those facilities.
Yeah, Paul, what's your take on President-elect Biden's COVID plan?
Well, I think I agree with Amy on the task force. I think that is critical to get accurate information out. But I think it's also going to be important that the task force and President-elect Biden's plan as he moves forward is to recognize some of the challenges of getting that information to the people who need it. Not only some of the equity issues along racial lines, but also poverty. That for most of us, we all have a smart device. We have access to Wi-Fi. You know, our phones are probably not more than a couple of feet away from us. You know, most of our waking lives, certainly. But for lower income folks, they might not have that same kind of access to that information. So we've got to make sure that it is getting out there, and it might be, you know, we can't rely on some of the ways we normally would do it using social media, because people don't have access to it. So we've got to get the information out as much as possible, which raises the whole issue of digital divide. People just simply don't have access. I also think it's going to be critically important the use of community-based organizations, the nonprofit sector, who are the folks, the boots on the ground, so to speak, front lines, working in local communities, are tied directly to the president-elect's plan and can help disseminate that information and make sure that there's a bridge between what's happening in Washington and happening, you know, on the local streets.
You know, that's a really good point. Jennifer, I want to turn to you and get your thoughts on what Paul just said about, you know, ways that the federal government can lean on probably those leaders who've actually been leading locally in executing a robust COVID plan. What are your thoughts?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you, Peter. Thank you to the ASA for inviting me to be a part of this conversation, speaking about the local municipal perspectives. And absolutely, Paul's statement about community organizations being the link bridge is very important. One of the most important things that President-elect Biden and his team can do is really foster a sense of stakeholder collaboration, so that you're talking to those individuals and entities that are on the ground in the local communities, because we certainly know that there is no one-size-fits-all plan that will work for every community or for all the geographic areas. And so in order to be able to tailor it to be most effective, working with those local community entities and persons is critical.
Paul, I want to sort of piggyback off of something else you said, and that is the impact of the pandemic, sort of the short-term impact. You know, we know the pandemic has impacted women's financial well-being, but, you know, we assume it will also have some long-term effects on the retirement savings, on economic security in general. What do you think President-elect Biden should do in his first, say, 100 days to perhaps protect that economic security of women caregivers, you know, help them get their lives back on track? There's a statistic out recently that nearly 900,000 women have left the workforce because of caregiving alone.
Well, I mean, we have to get control of the virus. I mean, because until the virus, I mean, as they get control of it, but we're able to, you know, reduce the positivity rates, we're able to have fewer people getting sick, that we can't begin to address the economic issues. So a lot of the women, particularly you mentioned women, but just a lot of folks, I mean, 10 million Americans are still out of work who were working pre-COVID. So we have to get the virus under control. And then once we do that, the economics will come back and people will be able to get back into the workforce. But I think that what we've learned, and I think, you know, they're having employers be supportive of folks who are caregivers. But we've proven that people can work from home. I mean, I know on my staff, I have several people who have younger children, school-age children, and they're having to sort of balance that with doing their duties, and they're doing it just fine. So some of what I think the president-elect can do is, I don't know if there's executive orders, but certainly from the bully pulpit, encourage employers to be flexible and to understand the needs of caregivers, and that sometimes there's a doctor's appointment at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but with our ability to work remotely, that if that person works, you know, later into the evening or earlier in the morning, that we need to be flexible so that the caregivers can continue to do that vital function, but they're able to also do their jobs and be able to help support their families.
Amy, you and
Yeah.
I have talked about in the past about how caregiving was very much very visible in the DNC platform
Right.
and in Biden's priorities. Did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Exactly. Yeah, Biden's proposed a caregiving plan that includes paid parental leave or paid leave for both parents of children and also people providing caregiver services for older adults. And this would be just a huge difference in the way that we, as a nation, face caregiving. Right now, there's unpaid leave that can be taken under federal law, but nothing paid. So we know that with the income differences across the country, that it's not really an option for people that may be at the lower income levels. So paid leave is going to make a huge difference, both for childcare and for elder care.
Yeah, there are a couple of interesting questions that have come in during this chat. One of them is related to how we can address some of these pandemic-related issues, looking at it through the lens of the age-friendly model. I'm sure Paul and Amy, you're quite familiar with the age-friendly model, which is at its simplest a way for various stakeholders to focus on a variety of key issues in a community, whether they be transportation or housing. Paul, does San Diego have experience with the age-friendly model? And if so, how could we rely on it a little bit to meet the COVID challenges?
We're moving towards it. I wouldn't say that we're completely there, but I think that at the local level, our officials are aware of the community concept. So as we build a new affordable housing, that it's on transit, it's near parks, it's near the amenities that are needed, and that we're being cognizant of some of the special needs that older adults might have from a physical standpoint, particularly. So I think there's an awareness, but I think that awareness needs to continue building, and so that as we develop communities, we're cognizant of it. I think that what we're seeing now with COVID is all of these things are kind of exacerbated because people are living isolated. They're not able to get out and do those amenities. They're told stay in place, don't go to those things. And so I think we're going to see some long-term impacts of that are going to really create problems for years after the immediate COVID crisis is done.
And I know Jennifer's having just some minor tech difficulties. This is technology, modern age. We'll get her back on again shortly. Amy,
I just want to add to that. Yeah. California right now is working on a master plan for aging, where the governor has brought together aging leaders across different parts of the aging sector, from housing, transportation, infrastructure. And they've all come together to put together a plan for the next, 20 years. And I think that's a model that other states can look to. I think only a handful of states, maybe 3 or 4 states, have done such a thing to really look forward about the growing number of older adults in their states and really plan for that. And that's something that California is just about to finish planning, and then we'll move into implementation. So
one area where I know we've talked about this in the past, and in fact, we're hosting a Generations Forum on the topic, and that is around bridging the digital divide. Amy, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what we see in terms of opportunities for a Biden administration regarding investments in key infrastructure to get broadband out, to get resources out to folks that would help reduce the digital divide or bridge the digital divide.
Right. So Biden has talked about really investing in rural areas where we know a lot of older adults are living. And he's planning to expand internet and broadband access in those areas. And he's committed $20 billion for rural broadband access. And this will triple the funding that's currently available. And it's going to be a great improvement for people who right now can't access, they're isolated, they can't access, friends and family via the internet, but also for people that would like to access telehealth in that way.
Yeah, Paul, how are you seeing those opportunities in San Diego? What would they be helpful to you? I mean, you're in a primarily urban environment, but I suspect there's quite a digital divide to bridge in an urban setting as well.
Well, there's a huge, for serving seniors, the organization that I'm involved with. I mean, we serve about 8,500 individuals a year, and most of them do not have access to internet because of their poverty level. 85% of them are below the federal poverty level. So they're in a situation where they can't take advantage of things really like telehealth. We can't, as a service provider, we can't use technology like what we're using today to do activities and social type things. We can't do that. We're using technology that exists, but on the receiving end, they don't have it. And so it would go a long way towards helping with the social isolation issue that is existing now. But frankly, we need to be candid. There was a major social isolation issue even pre-COVID that wasn't being particularly well taken care of. And so I think broadening that out, I think the important aspects of telehealth, the important aspects of being able to stay connected with friends and family are critically important. And I mean, I view it as sort of a fundamental kind of right, but also, I mean, even if we want to set aside sort of the human aspect of why we should do it, just from an economic standpoint of making the investment so people can access services like most of the rest of the world, or most of the rest of the country is able to do, like healthcare, I think would overall have a reduction on costs. So I think it's a wise investment. It's also the right thing to do from a human perspective.
Yeah, that's right. Jennifer, I know your camera's not working, but I still want you to participate. So we're just going to listen to you. I hope that's okay. Can you talk to us a little bit about how we start to heal divides? I really want us to tackle this question. It's a big one, so I suspect we don't have enough time to solve it here. But we've seen unprecedented racial divides in communities across the country. Jennifer, can you talk a little bit about what you see in Brookhaven? What supports are you looking for from the national level to really start to work towards real change around this?
Thank you for the question, Peter, and hopefully I can be heard. This is definitely.
Oh, we're having trouble with your
question.
With your mic as well, Jennifer.
Is that better?
Okay. Well, Jennifer, while you're working that out, Paul, why don't I start with you, and then Amy, maybe you can sort of contribute to this question as well. How do we start to heal this divide that's just been created, that's been revealed, really, and what can we do about it?
Well, I mean, a wise person once told me that we all have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and that's the right ratio to use those parts of our bodies. And I think using our 2 ears, we should be listening twice as much as we're all talking. And I think we have to make sure we are reaching out to everyone in the country and talking to each other and getting back to a sense of civility. I mean, hopefully with a new president who's less contentious, shall we say, maybe we can get back to at least talking to each other and not talking past each other. And so these are some policy issues as much as just good manners. I mean, I think it's sort of the Mr. Rogers philosophy of being a good neighbor. We need to get back to that. Our elected officials need to model that. We need to start there so that we are interacting and talking and able to come to resolution.
Right.
Back in my earlier career, I worked for an elected official, and she was a Democrat, probably a moderate to liberal Democrat, but she was able to work with, moderate to right-leaning Republicans, because at the end of the day, it was at the city level, doing what was right for the city of San Diego was of paramount importance, and people could compromise. We've reached a point in this country where it seems like it's almost impossible to compromise, and that my constituents will think I'm a bad person if I compromise with somebody else. And so I think it's back to that listening and thinking, being thoughtful about when we do open our mouth and what we say, and try to focus on the longer term goal.
Right. And I'd like to just remark, I saw in the news this morning that during this last election, we had the highest turnout in history. And it's just amazing that so many people were engaged and making their voice heard. And I think that's just we should all celebrate that, no matter what our political stripes. And then also, Biden's pick of a running mate who's both Black and Indian, first woman to be a vice president, I think is also just something that is going to speak volumes when he's trying to work with different communities.
Speaking of voice and volumes, it seems we are unable to hear Jennifer here in the moderator section, but I understand our audience on Facebook Live has been able to hear her. So, Jennifer, I'm just going to let you just go, just answer away, and our staff will let us know when you're done because we can't hear you. So, what's your take on how we do this? Go for it.
Okay, thank you so much, Peter. And this is definitely, it's a challenging question. It's a huge issue. It's multifaceted. I think that it would be very important for President-elect Biden and his team to really make a long-term commitment to looking at these issues of racial justice and racial and economic disparities, and to try to look at it as a marathon, not as a sprint, because it will take time and commitment and dedicated efforts to be able to unravel some of the issues that occur in our country around race and the systems that have been built based on systemic racism. And so a long-term commitment to these causes will definitely help us continue to move forward, better understand these issues and the historical context around these issues, and come together around some healing.
Jennifer, I got some highlights from what you said. I can't wait to listen to the video back. But you basically are talking about the commitment and the dedicated effort we need, because it's a marathon, not a sprint. I couldn't agree with you more. I want to tackle some additional topics, and then again, Jennifer, we'll turn to you as we go through these. No need, or no new administration can really ignore Social Security. So Amy, Paul, Jennifer, at a super high level, how should the new administration ensure that Social Security remains viable in the long term? I know that's a big question, but just sort of, what are some highlights?
I'll jump in. I'll start. I mean, I think the president-elect has already proposed, that for people making more than $400,000 a year, that they would have to pay into the system above that. I mean, frankly, from my standpoint, right now it's $137,700 is the max. I think raising that cap to bring in more finance or more dollars is a simple, easy way to do it. I mean, we know that generally wealthier people tend to live longer. That's an unfortunate reality, and because they have access to better health care, et cetera. And so there seems reasonable that they should pay into the system, maybe at a higher rate. So I think that would be a simple fix.
One other change that Biden's proposed that I really like is that he would provide a higher benefit to people that are around age 85. And I think that's going to be a really nice and helpful way for people who are perhaps have exhausted some of their retirement funding by that age to have a little bit of a boost compared to other Social Security recipients.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's such a huge issue. We have to make sure that so many people that have put into the system are able to, take out from it as they age. I think it's really important. I think there's some other issues we should talk about as well. Obviously, Medicare is crucially important to folks, particularly those who are also taking Medicaid. Amy, what policies might President Biden put in place to protect and strengthen these programs?
There's a lot of exciting things that he's proposing. One is reducing the age of eligibility to age 60, which will help a lot of older adults who are in the younger older adults. And I think that is something that would really be beneficial to a lot of people in that retirement age. One thing that I'm very excited about is he's talking about repealing the law that won't allow Medicare to negotiate the price of drugs. And if that could be repealed, because Medicare is such a huge payer, CBO has scored that that's a huge savings for the Medicare program. And I know that some members of Congress have called for really reinvesting a lot of those dollars into expanded dental and vision and hearing services for Medicare beneficiaries, as well as eliminating the out-of-pocket expenses, not eliminating, but reducing the out-of-pocket expenses for people getting Medicare drugs under Part D. So that's very exciting. And then on the Medicaid side, one thing that is of note is that Biden's calling to really eliminate the institutional bias, which right now Medicaid will pay for nursing home care, but does not always pay for home and community-based services. And so if we can move even further to reduce that bias, then people can receive care at home where they want it for longer.
Paul, did you want to add other?
I would. Amy touched on most of the points. I would just say that I think the CBO number on negotiating drug prices was almost $500 billion. I mean, it's a big number. I mean, frankly, from my perspective, when Part D was created, it was a mistake in the first place. I mean, it was frankly due to the pressure of the drug companies. Didn't want that, and President Bush and his administration went along with it, as did Congress. But negotiating drug prices would be a great place to start. It would save the government money and potentially save the end-use consumer money as well. So, and I think everything else that I think Amy touched on did a good job of summarizing.
So, in addition to COVID and the general economic security of Americans, President-elect Biden's transition plan also talks about climate change and the environment. And I'm wondering if we could just sort of segue to that. The environment has a large impact on older adults, particularly on older adults of color. So how aggressive do you think this administration should be, this future incoming administration should be, in creating a concrete plan just to prevent the climate catastrophe that we'll be facing? Amy, do you want to start with that one?
It's just funny because you said climate catastrophe. Like, yes, it's a very important priority. So I'm really happy that Biden's pledged on day one that he's going to rejoin the Paris Agreement, to work with other nations to address climate change, and then also to make historic investments in clean energy. And, to kind of circle back to what Paul was saying earlier in the conversation, this is not only good for the environment, it's good for jobs and for economic growth as well.
We see Jennifer. We finally can see Jennifer. Jennifer, I'm so glad you're back. To us, you've never left, but to us, you're back. Can you comment on climate change and its impact on older adults and communities of color? Because I know this is a really important issue for you and folks in Brookhaven.
Absolutely. And so this issue of climate change, it can also tie into the zoning issue that we mentioned in the beginning of the program. Certainly in Long Island, we are very hyper aware of climate change, being that we are surrounded by water, and we are very focused on issues of water quality, of open space preservation, and certainly when we think about zoning at a local municipal level, that is going to be very connected to climate issues, whether it's air quality because you're citing certain types of projects in certain communities, or whether it is other types of zoning issues. Certainly your local government has plays a very big part um, in how our communities look, but also the health of our communities because of issues of air quality and water quality. And so one thing that the federal government could provide is additional resources to help communities with long range planning. And so certainly when you're looking at issues of older Americans, we know that a lot of times you have very different needs than what you had as a younger person. So as your empty nest, as you go through the empty nest phase, or you divorce, or a spouse dies, all of these things all of these things can force you to look at downsizing. And what options do you have in your local municipality? And so instead of focusing on projects in a piecemeal fashion, are we looking at community planning, long-term, long range? Are we considering our climate goals for our community and how that plays into our zoning? So all of those factors are important, and resources to help communities with this comprehensive planning, long range community planning would be very beneficial.
Yeah, what other, Paul or Amy, what other sort of national, and Jennifer, if you have other ideas as well, what sort, from a national perspective, what could, the EPA do, or other organizations or federal agencies do to make sure that older adults are taken into account with climate change policies?
Well, I would say, one of the things is something we talked about a little bit earlier, which is a communications plan that makes sure that it reaches those folks. I think we have to understand that older adults are not a monolith. They're made up of people, a range, the whole gamut from one end of the political spectrum to the other. And so there's not a one size fits all that, so, okay, older adults, we're just check the box, this is how we deal with it. We have to be targeted, we have to go out, and again, understand that sometimes it's knocking on the door or making a phone call, and that we can't just send an email and say respond to this doodle, poll or whatever. You have to communicate sometimes face to face to make sure that you're reaching out to everybody.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I think some folks would be surprised to learn that older adults care about the environment, since I know sometimes we engage in some generational warfare, and it's usually younger generations who blame older generations for climate change. And I would argue, well, that's an opportunity, isn't it? That's an opportunity to actually engage all generations to help solve the issue. In fact, I know we have a wonderful generations blog post that's really thoughtful around climate change that I know folks would love to read, and we'll post it here in a little bit. But this idea that climate change impacts all of us is really an important point. Amy, did you have anything else to add on climate change? No.
I think you covered it. That sounds great.
Okay. All right. So we covered a lot of very difficult and challenging topics today. I want to end on some optimism, I hope. And that is, what is actually possible versus what's impossible? Let's do some prognosticating here. What are some of the political realities that a Biden-Harris administration will be facing? Jennifer, I'll start with you from the local level. I understand that it's looking like the county or the region that your councilwoman represents may have ended up voting primarily for President Trump. So I'm wondering, what are the political realities on the ground from your perspective?
Sure, and it is a challenge when you're dealing with populations that have very diverse political perspectives. I think the theme that we keep coming back to around stakeholder collaboration, it's important to get different groups and diverse groups from the community together. So as we're talking about topics around older Americans and what their needs are, it's important to have those conversations on the ground in the community with other Americans, younger Americans, to kind of find common ground. What are the goals in your particular community? What do you need? How can we accomplish it together? And so even though you are dealing with very drastic political perspectives, certainly coming to the table at the local level always yields very positive results.
That's a really good point. Amy, what do you think nationally? What's possible? What's impossible?
I mean, I think the election showed us that the nation is still very divided. And so we're going to need to really compromise to get anything done. And I am pleased with Biden's track record in that area. He's been in the Senate, which is very much deliberative body, and making compromises for most of his career. And so I'm hoping that he can bring those skills to the nation and help with the healing process, and also, work with members of Congress to get some things done.
Right. Paul?
Well, I would agree. I think compromise is going to be the key thing. I know for many of us who have been advocates, I think we were hoping to be able to, go on offense and be able to make some broad, sweeping change. But that's not the reality. I mean, despite the fact that President-elect Biden has won the popular vote by more than 5 million votes, that isn't how we choose presidents. And so it's very close in some of these other areas. And I think we have to just be realistic. And I don't want to be a wet blanket here, but the reality is California, the margin is about almost 5 million. So you take California out and maybe take out New York, the other 48 states, President Trump actually got more votes from the other 48 states. So it shows how divided we are. If you look at the House right now, there's civil war amongst the Democratic Party between the progressive and moderate wings, and the margin is less. So they've got to come together. In the Senate, the Democrats are looking for the 2 Georgia seats. Even if they get the 2 Georgia seats, it's 50-50 with Vice President Harris breaking the tie. But that means Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has 49 vetoes in his caucus. And any one of them says no, and that means he's got to keep Bernie Sanders and Joe Manchin happy. So everything is going to be about compromise, both within the Democratic caucus and working with Republicans across the aisle. And certainly, if the Georgia seats don't go Democratic, then you're going to have a Republican majority with Mitch McConnell ready to say no to much of what might be proposed by President Biden. So it's incumbent. That's the reality. But I think it's incumbent on all of us as advocates to continue the pressure on elected officials, both sides. In Jennifer's case, dealing with maybe Republican-leaning, Trump-supporting folks, we've got to get people focused on aging issues and why that's important. And at least historically, there has been some bipartisanship around aging issues. And so I think maybe we can build off of that.
Yeah, I'm reminded of one of my favorite quotes, and that is that aging is the ultimate bipartisan or nonpartisan issue, right? And it's true. So, Jennifer, Paul, Amy, I want to thank you for joining us today on the ASA Live. I want to thank everyone else who tuned in and asked some really thoughtful questions. Please take a look at the chat feature and click on some of those links that we referenced during our chat today. If you want to get more involved in ASA's policy committee or policy work, please reach out to us. We will be pulling together a pretty robust policy agenda to be unveiled in early 21. I know we're very excited to hear from many of our ASA members, but also folks who are sort of on the fence and aren't ready to commit to ASA membership. But if you do, sign up now, because you will get a special, a couple of additional months of membership if you join now during our membership celebration. So everyone, again, thank you very much for joining us, and tune in for the next ASA Live.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.